We've got Notre Dame, BYU, and the Shamrock Series, of course, coming up this weekend. And Jared Lloyd is with us. He covers BYU football for the Daily Herald and HeraldExtra.com. Thanks again, Jared, for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. I love talking football. So this is great. I'm looking forward to this matchup. Should be a lot of fun. One that's been a long time coming.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that, and I was thinking about that. It really has been. This is one that was kind of cooking, for a long time, and we're finally getting that. And this is, it's also one. It was supposed to be a BYU home game, and as they continue to negotiate this thing, it ends up being in Las Vegas and part of Notre Dame's Shamrock Series. And I know, kind of, it seemed like maybe back in the summer, kind of leading up to this. I know maybe not all BYU fans were happy about how this turned out. How are they feeling right now heading into this game? Is there any resentment kind of lingering at all?
I think there's a little disappointment because BYU did have Notre Dame come to Provo a couple times, and
Right.
I think there's that national cachet that Notre Dame brings, and they were looking forward to that. I mean, originally it was a 6-game slate that they signed on for, and that was going to be 4 in South Bend and 2 in Provo, and the Provo game, just with the evolution of college football, both for BYU and for Notre Dame, kind of made everything kind of not happen the way it was originally supposed to happen. And, frankly, I enjoyed my trips to South Bend, and I think BYU fans did too. There were a lot that made that trip, and got to see BYU take on the Fighting Irish in South Bend a couple of times, and kind of looking forward to that return trip. But, Tom Homo and BYU's director of athletics, I think he wants to keep a really good relationship with Notre Dame. I think that's really important to him. And so finding a way to work to make this game happen, and BYU is going to have a lot of fans down in Las Vegas. They always do. So that's
Sure.
not going to be a big deal. I think he's satisfied, but I do think there's some fans that would have loved to see this game be in Provo.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first time I guess things have turned out this way when Notre Dame gets involved in a series and stuff like that. Kalani Sitake, he is now in year 7 there at BYU. What's kind of the temperature on him at this point? Is he still pretty well thought of there?
Oh, he's considering what BYU's been able to accomplish in the last 3 years. Now, there were some doubters heading into 2020 because, they'd had a really, couple of mediocre seasons, and there were some people thinking, well, is he really the right guy? And as you know, the way that the college football world is, Sean, the patience with coaches it seems to be shrinking year by year. You get less and less leeway as a coach. But the way that they played in 2020, came back with a really strong campaign in 2021. Started out well here in 2022. I think there's and the fact that he's a BYU alum, the fact that he played for the Cougars and has a tremendous passion for BYU football, that resonates with most BYU fans. And sure, everybody wants to win the national championship every year, and that's at most institutions that have any sort of tradition. And that's not going to happen. That's just not realistic. But he's absolutely, done a great job, and you got to give a guy credit when they've lost a total of 5 games in 2.5 years. That's a solid showing.
Absolutely. Well, and the Colorado job just came open, as you well know, and we've seen already now 5 Power 5 jobs come open just in the first 5 weeks of the season. I'm curious, when you look at Colorado, like when you look at a school like BYU that's been able to, with multiple coaches, sustain some success out there, whereas a program like Colorado really has not been able to find that footing. Why do you think BYU has maybe been able to be so much more successful than a school like Colorado that's been in a couple of different Power 5 conferences?
Well, I think BYU embraces what it is. It's a religious institution. It has some very significant demands that it puts on athletes that come to BYU. They're expected to follow, not just do well academically, but also some of the honor code things that they have, and they embrace that. They want athletes that want to come and live at that standard, and as well as playing great football. And I think because of that, BYU has been able to establish a culture and build off of that. They do a great job in recruiting. I know a lot of times BYU doesn't get, highly regarded, highly touted recruits a lot of times. They're not high on the recruiting rankings. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to those, to be honest, Sean, because to me, every athlete needs to prove themselves at the level they're playing. And
Sure.
all these recruiting stuff, they haven't proven anything until they do it at the next level. And so BYU's just been able to really embrace that. And because of that culture, they've gotten in a lot of talented guys, developed a lot of talented guys, been able to keep their coaching staff together. In a lot of regards, I think that's underestimated in college football, when you're able to get good coaches, keep them around, so the players know what the expectations are, understand what they're trying to do, and are able to buy into that. And I think that's all been beneficial for BYU, that they've been able to use that. And we'll see how it pays off when they go to the Big 12 next year, because then it changes a little bit. You start playing the same teams year after year, and they get more and more familiar with you. So you have to be able to do things a little bit different than you do in BYU's current independent schedule.
Well, and they did. It's been what, about a dozen years now since
Mm-hmm.
BYU made that decision, and has been independent. How did it go the way they thought you know did it go the way they thought it was going to go, slash the feeling now as they make this segue into the Big 12? What do fans think about that?
Well, I know BYU fans feel some vindication, frankly. I mean, they feel like BYU's tradition. I mean, they've got a national championship, they've
Sure.
got a Heisman Trophy winner, they've had a lot of top 10, top 25 teams over the years. Frankly, since the advent of the passing game under Lavelle Edwards, BYU has been in the national conversation for much of the last 50 years. And yet they never were given the same credence, probably partly because of politics. BYU as a
Sure.
religious institution, particularly the West Coast and the Pac 12, which was kind of the natural geographic fit, politics definitely came into play with that. And so to finally get an opportunity to join, rejoin TCU, join Baylor, join, some of these other schools that have some similarities with their religious approach, as well as, just some great institutions in the Big 12. I think BYU fans do feel, hey, it was our time a long time ago. Now we actually get to do it. I think independence was about as good as they could have asked. I mean, they played a lot of big games in a lot of great places, had a lot opportunity for their fans to really show up and support the team across the country. And I've been to games in all corners of the country and seen BYU fans sometimes even outnumbering the home fans
Huh.
at some of these games, just because they've got a national following. And Notre Dame understands that, because
Oh,
they're able to do
absolutely.
that as well, because
Right.
they've got such a national brand. But it really helped BYU build that brand and set them up. And particularly the last couple of years, the success also put them in a position where they were a natural fit for a conference looking to expand.
I noticed for the big names, that BYU has on its schedule this year, there's no Utah on the schedule this year. Is there any sort of, like, is the future of that rivalry in doubt at all, especially with BYU making the move to the Big 12? What's going
I
on
think
there?
I think it has to be, Sean. I think that they have to look at it. You look at these 9-game conference schedules. You look at adding you add a non FBS opponent a lot of times to that schedule. That's 10 games right there in both conferences, and the fact that they don't play each other in conference means that BYU and Utah only have a couple of games on their regular season schedule that are even possibilities anymore. And when BYU was independent, they could work around it a little bit more, and Utah was willing to work with that, depending on what Utah's schedule was. But I don't think it's going to be as consistent, which is sad. I think teams like Florida and Florida State have been able to make it happen year after year, but it has helped, having not as many conference games. And I just don't know how, BYU and Utah are going to work it out being currently in different conferences. Now, is conference realignment done? Could they eventually end up in the same conference somewhere? Sure. Who knows how that's going to play out. But at this point, I don't think we'll see it every year. I'd like to see it as often as possible, because it's such a fun game here in Utah.
I
That
bet.
rivalry battle is just, it's something that football fans look forward to every single season. And the years that it hasn't happened, it just doesn't have the same buzz between, across the entire state.
Yep. They had a little different kind of rivalry game, I guess, last week against Utah State, and they improved to 4-1 after winning that game. And they kind of had to turn it on in the second half to end up winning that game by 12 points. Were you surprised at all at how competitive that game ended up being?
I was a little bit surprised, but I knew Utah State was going to come in and give everything they had. I mean, that's they feel like BYU and Utah often don't respect them. The Aggies feel that they're not as respected as BYU and Utah, and so they come in with that chip on their shoulder, and they really changed around what they were going to do. They brought in a new quarterback and really changed their approach, and it worked really well for a half. But BYU was able to wear them down, and in the end, the W is what matters, and that's what BYU got.
Right.
Was it the most impressive performance against a Utah State team that struggled quite a bit? No. And I think BYU looks at it and says, hey, we need to play a lot better football if we're going to have a shot in the next couple of weeks against Notre Dame and Arkansas. But, at the end of the day, they got the win. They didn't. They were able to stay relatively healthy, which was big, and they had the extra couple of days. I know Notre Dame's coming off a bye week, but they did have the extra couple of days because it was a Thursday game,
Yeah,
and
true.
those extra couple of days do make a difference. So they're able to have a little bit more time to get prepared for this game against Notre Dame.
Got a pretty experienced quarterback in Jared Hall, 33 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions combined in the last couple of years. Is it fair to say that they pretty much go as he goes?
He's their best player. That as far as skill positions, he's the guy that makes that offense go. And he is so much fun to watch. I've actually watched him since high school. He's a local kid here in the area, and watched him grow up. He's a legacy kid as well. His dad, Kalen Hall, played at BYU back in the 1990s when I believe there was also games against Notre Dame back in those days. But he comes in and plays with such level-headed. He's such a level-headed kid. He doesn't get too high. If there's a mistake or problems, he doesn't get too low, and he doesn't throw a lot of bad balls. Now, there's a couple of passes. Every quarterback has a couple of passes that maybe either could have been intercepted or should have been intercepted that weren't. But for the most part, he puts the ball where his receivers can get it, and it's really hard for defenders to get to it. He makes good decisions. He's a veteran. And he takes care of the ball really well. And that's kind of what BYU wants him to do. He's not necessarily asked to go out there and throw 50 times a game and, just light it up like BYU quarterbacks of the 80s and 90s, but manage the game. Don't make turnovers, make smart calls, make good reads. And he throws a really nice ball. He's really shown that he can put the ball in a lot of different windows, the back shoulder fade.
Yeah.
He can throw it deep. He can do a lot of things. And he really is, Sean. I really believe that BYU plays and wins when he plays well and gives them that chance. And, that really, the offense really depends on how he's doing.
But he seems to distribute the ball well, but the receiver who stands out is Keanu Hill, who's the guy, 20 yards per catch plus compared to the other guys, a little bit more bunched up in their yards per catch totals, I guess. What maybe kind of sets Hill apart, do you think?
Well, Hill does a really good job getting the ball down, getting downfield and making a play on the ball and on the deep ball. That's why his yards per catch are so high. He gets a lot of attention down the field, and he's really had to step in and play a bigger role since BYU's top two receivers have been injured, not at 100%. I don't know if either of them will be at 100% this week, but he's stepped into that and been that big play guy. They've gotten some other, some nice plays from some other possession guys that have really allowed Hall to move the ball around. And he's not trying to spot, he's not trying to lock in on one guy. He's really good at trying to see what the defense is going to give him and then get the ball to the right guy and make the most out of it. And maybe that's a 5-yard route, maybe that's a 20-yard route, maybe it's a 50-yard route, and he really does try to read that and does a good job with it. And so Hill's been able to benefit on a lot of those deep passes, and he does a good job down the field.
I saw you gave their offensive line a C grade for last week's game. Is that kind of pretty much their biggest offensive question, do you think, is just the play of that line?
Well, it's the expectation that BYU had, because they brought back 7-8 guys with experience, talent. There was a high expectation that this offensive line could potentially be one of the best BYU's had. Some of these guys are getting national award attention, even draft attention. and yet they haven't really seemed to be quite as good as I think as they expected to be. To be honest, I think they expected to be better than they were. I mean, in the first half against Utah State, BYU had negative 21 yards rushing, and part of that was a fumble, a ball that got knocked backwards. But most of it, they just weren't running the ball very well, and so there is a little bit that unit needs to elevate its game. And C was, they were definitely average in my opinion. I feel like they have the capability to be a lot better than that. They're big, they're physical, they're experienced. I don't know if they're as fleet of foot or as agile for some of the run schemes that BYU is running, and so defenders have been able to beat them to spots at times. But yeah, that line, that group, it really, I mean, it's been great in pass blocking overall. It really has done well there. But
Yeah.
the run block, there's definitely some area, quite a bit that they can improve in that aspect of the game.
Well, on the other side of the ball, they ranked 93rd in the nation against the run, and Oregon was really able to exploit that with over 200 yards. Utah State ran it really well in the first half against them last week. How big a concern do you see that in this matchup specifically against Notre Dame?
I think it's huge. And I think Notre Dame's proven that it can move the ball on the ground and then, take advantage of what that opens up. And I think BYU is fully aware of that. And, they really do have some questions to answer there. How much of it is scheme? How much of it is execution? And how much can they clean up in both areas? Because, a lot of what they've tried to do against Oregon, against Utah State, and to a lesser extent against Wyoming, was to try and take away some of the short passes and some of the things that they expected. And then those teams came out and ran the ball a lot more than they anticipated. And the scheme and the execution both weren't great. There were a lot of mistakes. And so Notre Dame, I'll be very surprised if Notre Dame doesn't come out and say, hey, we're going to try and test you the exact same way. And they've got the line and the running backs and the ability to do that. The question is can BYU avoid the mistakes, the missed tackles, the assignment breakdowns that allowed those teams to be really successful? I think that's a pretty significant step from what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. So I do expect Notre Dame to have some success on the ground, but BYU's got to limit that and not let Notre Dame control the game with its run game.
All right. So when you look at this matchup, Notre Dame, BYU wins if what happens Saturday night?
Well, I think we've just been talking about it. I think it comes down, I think BYU wins if it's able to win the battle in the trenches. I think that if Notre Dame controls both the offensive and defensive lines, then I think Notre Dame wins because Notre Dame's going to run the ball. It's going to be able to control the clock and do what it wants. And, then you open up the play action pass and, getting the ball out to the wide receivers, tight end, obviously a fantastic tight end.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of options there. As far as what they're able to do if they're able to control that line of scrimmage. And the same thing's on the other side of the ball. If BYU's not able to run, if they're one-dimensional, Jaron Hall's really good, but that really, that allows the Irish, linebackers, blitzers, defensive linemen to just pin their ears back and go after him. So BYU's got to be strong at the point of attack. And, this is basic football 101, right, Sean? Win in the trenches and you win the game.
That's it.
But BYU's big enough and physical enough to be able to match Notre Dame. But I really feel like the team that's able to get the edge in that area is going to be the team that comes out on top.
Yep. I think that's kind of what it all boils down to as well. Great stuff from Jared Lloyd covering BYU football for the Daily Herald and heraldextra.com. You can see all his BYU stuff there at heraldextra.com. Enjoyed it, Jared. Great stuff from you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Enjoy the game Saturday night.
Thanks, Sean. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a really fun contest, and we'll see we'll learn a lot about both teams from this game.
I think so too. Take care.